Well, happy to jump in. I know it's a little late, and want to make sure that we respect everyone's time. That was very kind of Sheila to say that. I am not a legend. I am very happy to see some familiar faces on this call, including my colleague William, but also Beth and Judith and folks I've talked to about these issues over the years. I know you've had a bunch of trainings, so happy to share my screen, get right in, and do sort of a 10,000-foot overview. A lot of really good questions already, probing on the timing, the prioritization, the logistics, the walking, all of that I'll touch on. I've just by means of background for folks who don't know me, I'm the Director of Government Affairs for Education Trust. Been doing sort of legislative advocacy in DC for about 11 years. Was at a different organization for 5 or 6 years, focusing on higher ed policy, and then I've been in this role for about 5 years now as well. So happy to pull up my PowerPoint and move through that. Make sure that I am doing this correctly. You folks see my screen there? Can folks see that? Okay, seeing thumbs up. Wonderful. Cool. So this is obviously training. Actually, we are planning our own Hill Day on a variety of topics, including access to advanced coursework, and won't get into too many details there, but this was very well timed. So I'm walking through a lot of this stuff and revisiting some of the assumptions and editing this for 2024. This is all very helpful. So gave you my background already. This is just some top line objectives. I want to help you plan and prepare for your own Hill Day. Builds a little bit of skills to effectively meet with decision makers, and then take any questions, which we should have time for at the end. Again, try to move through this at a reasonably brisk pace, considering I think you've probably gotten a flavor of this. Don't want to assume anyone's background, though. This is supposed to be accessible for folks who have some experience doing direct advocacy, but also first timers who want to get a sense of sort of the beats and the rhythms of how these days usually go. So why do we do this is sort of a assumed thing when you agree to participate and share your time. But it is still important to kind of establish those priors. So these types of things can be really useful, both as just an exercise to work with like-minded people, share an experience together, build those bonds. But there are some direct benefits from doing this type of advocacy. The most obvious one is building relationships with offices and the staff, right? Not everything will be actionable immediately. There may be people that jump in and out of roles. If you do this work long enough, you see people flow into committees, into personal offices, into the private sector, into the nonprofit sector, into administration. So that personal relationship, while at the time it may be, oh, I talked to them, it was fine, probably you don't have anything to follow up with right now. You don't know where they'll be or where you'll be down the road. Additionally, as this is already mentioned, acknowledge and thank them for support. If they've shared it, that positive reinforcement can be really effective in empowering staff and internal staff when they're having discussions about what their boss should focus on, what they should advocate for, what they should waste political capital on or expend it on. That type of thing can really be useful. Same thing, persuade and ask for support. We just went through the asks. That's going to be the main thrust, but that's commonly understood as lobbying and what the main purpose of a lot of these meetings are. But there can also be baseline education, right? A lot of these staff, you should not take for granted that they know more than you. Many of them will not know more than you. Many of them will be overworked and underpaid and have 13 different issue areas, 18 different issue areas. They may be good people, they may be personally interested, but at the end of the day, it has to start somewhere, right? And you're coming there to deliver your perspective and education on how this system works, or in many cases, doesn't work as well as it should. Same, it's not just a one-way street, right? They're there, they have insight into the process in their internal office. They have insight into processes with other staff, with other offices, with committees, with their relationships with the other party, with the administration and other organizations. So among that, they may be able to share intel with you about other groups' focuses, or share their own institutional or office focuses, which can help you strategize. Again, same thing. If you're in the same boat with them, you could be working together on some of these issues. Maybe not necessarily first time you're meeting them, but in the future. That's why you would meet with them again. And quite frankly, just to show other orgs and funders that you can do this, right? You want to be able to say, we organized this, we pulled it off, it was fulfilling, we got feedback, we're learning from what happened. And now we have touch points with 15 new offices on these issues. And then bring that to folks to fund your work, but also demonstrate to other organizations, okay, yeah, they've got it together, let's work with them. So these are all just very top-line priors from an organizational perspective. So again, as mentioned, this already came up, right? Conduct some research. Who is this person? What's their background? Have they had any interaction with the criminal justice system in this specific case, or just expounded any sort of educational interest? What is their personal educational background? Any other positions around funding? Those types of things are useful to know. And when you identify the correct staffer, which I know in this is sort of set up, right? This is sort of from a cold perspective of just picking up the phone or sending an email. Once you know who that staffer is, you can look them up too. I mean, that's who you'll be actually talking to. So they may have a personal connection. They may have a geographic connection to where you're from. They may have an educational background. And all that does is build that relationship, and be able to say, oh, you went to this school. I'm going to the alumni thing, or I'm going to see that game, or whatever. Or, I spent time in that city. And all that stuff is what makes people stand out. That may be sort of random, and it may not be necessarily hyper strategic, but it can be valuable. And again, making an appointment, getting all that stuff in line, you guys are already well ahead of the game there. But these are all things you would do ahead of time. Additionally, we just had this discussion, right? What are you trying to accomplish? These are the types of asks you're making. How do you want to, convey these ideas? Create an agenda. Again, you have all of this already, so I won't belabor it. I do emphasize you should assign roles if possible. If it is a two-person group, definitely have someone, hey, person A, I'm going in, I'm going to do our intros. I'm so-and-so, this is so-and-so, we're from here. Then the staffer can say, oh, I've been here, or this is my role. I'm the legislative assistant. I've been in this office for X number of months or years. And then go into, okay, we want to make sure we talk to you about these three things and know who's going to take the lead on each one. It shouldn't be overly scripted like a play, but you should have a general sense and confidence that when I stop talking, this person's going to pick up the baton, right? We're not just going to kind of sit there and look at each other. One person should definitely be taking notes. A big part of this is debriefing, and I'll touch on that at the end, but making sure that you know what was said, trying to read any inferences or saying, oh, that person phrased that a certain way. I wonder what that means, just so you can follow up or have internal discussion with other people to figure out, okay, how do we respond to that? Or we don't. That can also be a strategic choice as well, to let things play out or let something move forward in time and then circle back to it later. And then make sure your materials are on point. Again, I know when you do these big hill days, some of this stuff's being supplied, so you won't have to necessarily worry about that, but make sure you have it and you're good to go. Again, what you should bring, the right people, right? We're trying to assign folks who fit with the background knowledge, the lived experience, anything that'll make them perfect to deliver this message. Again, something to take notes with, pen and paper, tablet, what have you. A leave behind, I believe Judith already referenced that as well. Data where you can have it. I think someone made a really good point about localities and the states that you're from and sort of how digital equity is interfacing or being implemented or not implemented. All that is gold. Anything that can drill down as much as possible. It's hard at the district level. It's a little bit easier at the state level, but anything you have can be useful. I think Chrissy made the point about, well, Cassidy has written something in this space. Like, definitely bring all that to the table. And half the time you may bring stuff to them that they're not even aware of, especially if it happened in district and they're in DC. Say, oh, I may have read an email from our comms team. I don't know. That's great to get a refresher on that. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. I've seen that happen before. Same with stories and sort of that personal involvement as well. And I'll touch a little bit more on that in a second. Sample legislation, which in this case, I don't think we're that far. That can be very tricky too, because there is sort of a perception of like, you need to get to some comfort level there, but it is worth noting. If you can do that, it does make their lives easier. I'm drafting sample legislation right now, actually, and giving that to offices. Oftentimes they won't have the capacity, or they go through Leg Council, which, as you can imagine, having one office that does all the drafting for like 535 offices can take a while to get things through. And the same thing with testimonials, letters, other things that you want to make sure that they see that represent a broader constituency than just you in the room, right? We have a letter signed by 100 orgs. We have a dear colleague letter with 50 other offices on it. Don't you want to be a part of this with them? This is an easy way for your boss to access this issue. And then we can continue to stay in touch and give you updates now that you've committed to at least some piece of this work. So during the meeting, again, this has been touched on. Want to make sure each person can introduce themselves, say where they're from, any relevant affiliations, so everyone knows who they're talking with. If you have a business card, it's appropriate to sit down and just say, hey, everyone puts their cards on the table, you all swap the cards. Feels a little bit like that scene in American Psycho. It can be kind of weird, but ultimately it's done. It's not a weird thing to do. So if you do have them, it's fine to offer them at the beginning of the meeting before you even really get into the meat of the topic. And sure, you want to make sure that they give introductions so you know who you're meeting with. You don't want to leave a meeting and be like, well, it was the main person that we had the email for, and then this other person, I'm not sure who that was. You want to be able to say, okay, it was Jim and Jane. We want to make sure that we're addressing both of them in any follow-up that we do. Because you never know, the person who got added late, maybe the person that's going to stick around for a while, and that other person may move on or they may transfer to a different portfolio. There's a million things that can happen that would circumvent that connection. So the more touch points you have, the better. Personalizing the issue. I mean, we've touched on this. I mean, this is a pretty nuanced topic, right? A lot of unfortunate aspects of advocacy can touch on things that were pretty traumatic or impactful in a person's life. I trust certainly never ask anyone to share anything they're not comfortable with. To the extent that you are comfortable and can lay that out on the table and link it, to the district, to the principal that you're in the room with, all of that is incredibly moving, right? I'm a big believer in most of the time, you don't really remember what people say to you, but you remember how people made you feel. So trying to make them feel like I met with someone today who I had a sense of their lived experience. I respect what they're doing. They inspired me. That'll be something they'll carry home and talk to their partner about or bring to the other people in the office more so than necessarily the technical aspects. That has to be there. You have to follow up with that, right? You have to say, okay, hey, great talking to you, but here's the technical detail that on paper that you can see and share a little bit more easily than our talking conversation. But ultimately, that sort of hook can be really, really impactful. Same thing with localized statistics and information, and this piece with a clear ask, right? You've had some clear ask outlined for you. The only other thing I'll say about this is that not every meeting is going to yield A, the answer you want, or B, have a clear ask. In this case, you do. But I've done meetings recently with our state folks where it's like, hey, you're Cassidy's office, right? This was last year for me. Here's our Louisiana folks. They're working on educator diversity. They're working on, HBCU funding, all these other things, ESSER cliff spending, pandemic response spending, all this stuff in the K-12 space. There's not necessarily a clear ask for Cassidy's office there. They should know what's going on in Louisiana. They should know that there are people who care enough to meet with them. There certainly are some funding asks that would be appropriate in appropriations context, which these staffers don't work on directly. But that's okay. On a baseline level, that's all right because you're demonstrating A, that you're a resource. Most of my meetings end with, hey, we want to be a resource for you. Let us know if any of these things we talked about are helpful. And B, you don't ask if you don't get, right? So even if it's not from a personal thing right away or ask right away, you're setting yourself up down the road, to follow up with something when the timing maybe makes more sense. So that's just a flag on that. A few things too, you may find in the time you're there may be a lull or there may be, things you want to get out of them. So asking follow-ups, right? You'll meet with some people, I'm sure, that may stonewall you a little bit. They'll be like, okay, yeah, great, thanks. Like polite, but clearly not overly engaged. These are types of questions you can use to probe and put the ball in their court, right? Are there related issues here that you know of that I may not know of? In terms of the issues themselves, how much support is there for digital equity? We had a bipartisan bill, right? There's an investment. Like, what's your sense of how are people talking about this? Like, is your boss talking about it? Is it being implemented in some other capacity that we can try and talk about or try and draw parallels with, connectivity in a carceral setting? How do you see the legislative session unfolding overall, right? Like, if you get to the point where you don't feel like you're drawing more pieces out on a specific issue, you can take a step back and talk about process and say, okay, like, is there a timing or a window we should be aware of, that we should circle back with you or we should circle back with other offices? What are your priorities, right? Maybe we've said three things that you're not that interested in, but there may be something else that's tangentially related here that we could help with. So these are all types of things you can jot down and employ if there's a lull or you want to try and get a little bit more out of them. So I'll finish with some tips, but just want to say as you're leaving, get a commitment. That doesn't necessarily mean, okay, get them to say yes, that I will co-sponsor this or yes, I will lead this issue, but rather it can be as simple as, hey, we've met with you. We would love to be able to follow up. Is that okay? Or we're going to bring you something, we're going to bring you more information here and we want to make sure we can circle back at a given time. and getting them to say, yes, send that to me, or yes, I'll expect to hear from you. That's something you could hold them to, and say, hey, we sent that to you, just following up. Again, they can ignore you. They get a million emails. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but you don't ask, you don't get. So even if it is a baseline level that is not a commitment on a policy issue, you want to make sure that you're closing by trying to say, hey, we're going to continue to be in touch, even if that doesn't come 4 months later. That happens all the time, especially in DC. Things get really, really busy. People have things to do, and that's all right. Identify next steps, very similar to what I said. Obviously, thank them for their time, make a plan to follow up, and make sure that they have both your leave behinds and your contact information and vice versa. I'm sure that will all be, again, provided through the context of the Hill Day, but those are things to make sure that you have. So some of these were already touched on. I'll start at the bottom. Comfortable shoes. If you have them, wear them. The marble floors are rock hard in all of these buildings. It's on a hill. So you will probably be going uphill at some point. You will be moving around constantly. The first bullet is incumbent. Be prepared for changes. Staffers are late. They get pulled into meetings outside their control. Their bosses get hearings scheduled outside their control. They may have to leave early. They may pass you off onto someone else you don't know. All these things happen. On the House side, it's not uncommon to meet in a hallway because they may not have the conference room scheduled, or if the member is in town, that means he's in the office. The big office for the member is where they usually meet people. So last year, I had a group of 15 Louisiana advocates in a hallway talking to their staffer about the 3 things we wanted to talk to them about. Luckily, their boss was in a hearing and actually stepped out to meet everyone, which is uncommon, but again, can happen. And that was a nice, surprise and good for him to interact with those folks. So just be flexible, and not everything's going to be what you might have dreamed it up, going in, and that's all right. It's real life. It's messy sometimes. Make sure you get, contact information of everyone in the meeting. Already said that. Make it as easy as possible. Have that stuff ready. Already said that. I do think, if you can get there early and say, hey, we're here, we know we're early, definitely do that. They may try and take you early then. And because of how things get stacked up, combined with the movement, as I think Sheila alluded to, like humane scheduling, right? I'm trying to do this right now. When you have a meeting in Rayburn, you want to have the next meeting in Rayburn, right? Keep it in the building as much as possible. Sometimes that's not going to be possible. So you're going to be moving through buildings, through corridors that look very similar, through signage that can be a little bit unclear. You may get turned around. You may be running late, right? So if you can start early, you give yourself more buffer time in between these meetings. And then try not to run over, both for your own scheduling purposes, but they may have back to back to backs all day. So try and get to that ask or get to that cap on time whenever possible. Same thing, just have somebody for the 2-person group, have somebody just have a thick folder of extra documents. Doesn't hurt. It can be a folio inside your note-taking pad, whatever, just to make sure that you have stuff. If someone shows up who was unannounced and asks for it, you don't have to be like, oh, I don't have a copy for you. Couple final things. I'll make sure we're at time. Good. We're almost there. Couple don'ts. Don't make presumptions. Don't really know anything about this individual in front of you. You may have done some cursory research, but you can only really get a very surface level sense of who this person is. They may be secretly a person very amenable to you, but working for a Republican because of XYZ circumstance, right? Or vice versa. It may be an office that the member likes you, but this staffer doesn't really care about this, and they may be with them for some XYZ reason. So just kind of go with it. If there's personal connections, great. Again, don't treat them like the enemy. It's kind of same thing, right? You don't really know. You can probably guess their boss is not going to be super helpful. But again, they may switch positions down the road. You may be able to get something out of this that wasn't obvious. Don't lie, which is more of a don't panic and say something that is probably not true. That happens. You get put on the spot. You're thinking, oh, yeah, I think so. And right away, you're like, oh, I shouldn't have said that, right? It's perfectly fine to be like, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, or that's a really good question. We would love to circle back with you. And right there, you've created a touch point to come back to them with that answer and created the next conversation. So really, that's not really even a bad thing to not know things. And I would rarely speculate as well, just because it's not super helpful usually. It's kind of like punditry, right? People just throw out a lot of opinions on TV. And it's like, it's more entertainment than actual strategic thought. So it's perfectly fine to circle back with folks. And sometimes it's actually attractive and useful to do that. Don't let it get off topic. That can happen sometimes. certainly want to do a personal check. Oh, I went here, or I've lived in this town, and then you move on and get to the topic. And if they are taking it off topic, try to say, great. Oh, that's great that your boss is focused on that. I just want to make sure we have time to get to everything. Or that's a really interesting aspect of that. It's really similar to the thing I want to talk about. And then you pivot back to the thing that you want to talk about. Same with the time, right? This is already raised, I think, by CC or someone else. Don't make too many asks for the time you have. Just have a clear sense of we can get to the key elements in 15 minutes, right? If things go longer, one thing takes most of the time, that's great. We just need to make sure that we hit those other beats. And then don't be partisan, right? I mean, this is more from a trust perspective. We're a nonpartisan organization. Again, you don't know who you're talking to, and ultimately, because of the filibuster, we have a system in which most things that get done require votes from both parties for most of the time. So in the immediate sense, there's really nothing to be gained from that, as cathartic as that may be in the moment. So after the meeting, just want to debrief how it went. What happened? What worked? What didn't work? How did you feel when you were in there? Did you feel confident? If not, why not? What would you wish you would have known? Or did you feel confident? And why do you think that was? Getting a sense of just the comfortability level can be really important beyond just, okay, I wrote these 3 things down. We said we'd follow up on issue X, or he said circle back in 6 weeks. That types of thing, obviously elemental, but want to get a sense of people's comfort level and how you build your skills. Assign next steps, so know who's going to send that thank you note and that follow up. Don't just kind of leave that hanging out there, and make sure you execute that. So that is a very quick overview. I know we're almost at 8 o'clock. It is a Tuesday night, I think. What day is it? Tuesday. So happy to answer any additional questions. I know that was very quick and it's been a long day. Oh, apologies. Is there a question in the chat? Yeah, I think Beth, I think that's I don't know how these are scheduled for half an hour, I'm assuming. Is that right? If that's the case, I think it's fine to assume that unless they say otherwise. If you get the sense from them running around, like crazy, say, hey, just want to check, we have you until, let's say, 1 to 1:30. Do we have that full time? Just off the top real quick, you can do that. If not, though, and they seem relaxed, you could probably get away with assuming that the meeting will end on the scheduled time.
Yeah, I have a question, Reed. I believe the meetings are normally, and this is what I've been told, between 15 minutes to half an hour.
Okay.
And so we're giving ourselves a span of about an hour before we schedule another meeting. So like that, we have that leeway of, going from one meeting and be able to travel to another meeting, depending how far it is. So when we're doing the scheduling, we're scheduling within the hour time frame, but that's not necessarily the amount of time that we've been given for the meeting. Mostly the meetings are going to be 15 minutes or whatnot.
Okay.
So, some other questions in the chat that I want to answer real quick, and that is that the legislators, you will know who it is that you're going to be meeting with. We're trying to set up, as soon as we have confirmation, but I urge you guys to look at your particular legislators. Depending on your address, we're hoping to have a meeting scheduled with your legislator, your House rep from your address. And then, of course, the Senate. So that's the hope, that we had at least 2 meetings per each of you. And those who don't have those meetings scheduled will probably be supporting others that do. And so when you are in a group and going over there to meet with the legislator, you are the one with the lead. So there's going to be other people there supporting you. They may not necessarily be from your state or constituents of that particular legislator. That's why when it's scheduled for you, you are the one in the lead, except for those that we have large groups being represented, like Maryland, that we have, about 3 or 4 or 5 people. Then you can figure out who wants to speak and whatnot. But for the most part, a lot of you are going to be loners in this sense as far as representation, but we will have other individuals supporting you in that aspect. Just wanted to, answer those questions that were in the chat.
And just to the final piece, and we can certainly hop off. I would just say that time frame, you probably will benefit by leading off and saying, thanks for your time. Want to make sure we have you for that time, if you think that's appropriate, and saying we want to talk about 3 things today. And it's digital equity, English language learning, and the student loan rehabilitation piece, just so they know. So it's not a question of, oh, we did most of that, now we got to do the 2 things at the end really, really quickly. Like they should be expecting, okay, we're going to jump from topic to topic. Because you can see people get carried away and they're asking you questions, not realizing there's more stuff to talk about. And even unwillingly or unknowingly for them, they've burned the whole time, even though they didn't mean to do that, and you certainly didn't want them to do that. So that would be the only other piece. And having an hour in between, right? You can go over. You want to make sure you get everything, but you can also say, if you have an extra 5 minutes, we can finish that point or whatever, and just take their temperature. And they may say, "I'm sorry, I don't have time." But again, they don't ask, you don't get, and it's pretty free willing. Like they've been on the receiving end of a lot of these, so most people are pretty normal and nice. I've found.
All right, guys, any other questions? I mean, this is been extremely helpful, particularly not only for those who this is the first time, but even for those who have come before. A refresher like this, and appeasing your anxiety, because when you're sitting there or when you're standing there in front of those representatives, there's always that anxiety of meeting with these individuals. And so we want to make sure that you're comfortable enough to be able to express your stories, your empathy, which is really what's going to captivate them. At the end of the day, is those stories and those experiences that we want to voice to them so that they can see what really needs to be driven as far as change is concerned. And thank you, Sheila, and thank you, Reed, so much for taking the time for this trainings. Again, we want to learn from the best, and I consider you guys experts in this area. And so we thank you definitely for giving us this time and these tips to get us well prepared.
My pleasure. You're all going to do great.
All right, guys.